Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to introduce Mr. Nick Tate.
Encore.
Yeah. More. Which one am I talking of?
This one.
This one. Okay.
Is that okay?
I guess. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Alrighty, I'm going to put that there. I'm going to record
Switch it
myself
around.
for the first time in my life. I want to go that way.
They're good.
No, there it is. Not very good at being a cameraman. Oh.
That's why you were in front of it.
That's it. Okay. Here we go. Well, I don't know how much you know about my career before I started Space 1999, but I thought what I'd do is I'd commence this talk with how I got the role, because lots of people want to know, how did an Australian actor get into Space 1999, right? There are many different parts to how I actually got the role, and various people involved with those parts would say, I'm the reason he got the role, or that day, on that day it was decided. But I'd been a young actor in Australia. My parents were actors. My mother was a woman called Neva Carr-Glenn, who was one of the most influential people in my entire life. She was a wonderful actress and played anything from adagio dancer as a young child to a young comedic actress to a dramatic actress. She left Australia. Our grandparents, her parents, were vaudevillians. And my grandmother had been an opera singer, which is a strange kind of transition that she married a vaudevillian. But they went to Australia at the very beginning of the century. And my mother was born in 1908. She claims it was 1910, on the 8th of May. But in fact, it was, we believe, the 10th of May in 1908. She married a man who was a vaudevillian and an alcoholic, and she had a very traumatic beginning in life. I don't know why I'm actually telling you about my mother, other than the fact that she was an actress, and everything about my life, when people said, did you ever go to drama school? My whole life was full of drama because of my mother. And the beginnings, she married another alcoholic, and he was my father. Their life was anything but ordinary. She was a star actress and rose to great fame both in England in the early 1930s, late to mid-late 1930s, and was starring as Nina Rosa in the West End of London when she married a very wealthy Australian farmer that had come to England, and he fell in love with this Australian actress and wanted her to come back to Australia and marry him. He came back in 1939, the beginning of the war, and she was about to go into a movie with Merle Oberon in England, and they kept on delaying the beginning of the film. So he was demanding that she get back in time for the wedding of all the people that he told that he was going to marry her. So eventually she got on a ship and came back, leaving the film because the film had had too many delays. That was a great regret for her because it might have been a huge start to her career. But she came back to Australia and married him within a week, and in Sydney with all the theatrical people in Australia very excited about this young actress that had come home and suddenly was now going to leave and go out and live in the back of Bourke. That is about 500 miles out into the outback of Australia, and often referred to as a place where if you don't know where you're going, it's far away from anything, it's out the back of Bourke. She went to live out the back of Bourke, mate, you know. That's where the Aboriginals and the kangaroos only live. But my mother went there with this man, and I think 20,000 head of sheep at the time. He was a very wealthy grazier, and she lasted 1 week in the outback, and tried to get the marriage annulled when she came back to Sydney. And the Sydney Theatrical Company were very welcoming at the time. War had broken out by now. This was 1939, and so Australia was very cut off from everything, and it was a very hard time for her because she wanted to go straight back to London and continue where she'd left off. The film was being made already in England, and she wasn't there. Anyway, she got on with her life in Sydney and met a very young man who was, my mother I think was 32 when she married my father, who was 27, so she was 5 years his senior. She was a star actress, and he was a young, kind of exciting, very glamorous young man who was very funny as a drunk all the time. But he was drunk all the time. And he hit a Bondi tram, which was like a, well, we know what a tram is, a great big heavy on-road rail car. And he hit it in a car he was driving head on and nearly died, went through the windscreen. And so she nursed him back to life. He broke his skull in about 4 places. I don't think he was ever the same again, quite frankly. He was a very funny man, and in fact, I wish I could show you a photograph of him, because somebody today gave me a photograph of my father when he was doing the voices on Thunderbirds. So my father was the early iteration of my entry into a production with the Andersons, because Sylvia Anderson worked with my father. She liked my father very much. He was a very charismatic, good-looking young man. And I don't think that Gerry Anderson ever really liked him very much, but Sylvia did. And it was extraordinary when I eventually came to America, to England. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, how it was that I came to meet the Andersons. But if we now go back in time, so my parents were actors in Australia, very glamorous actors during and after the war. We were cut off from all kinds of other entertainment, so Australia had to make its own entertainment. Radio became a very large part of that entertainment. As we watch television here at night times, everybody goes home and watches TV for entertainment, and so we used to, as indeed you did here in America and in Australia, you listened to radio for entertainment before the television started in the country. We didn't get television in Australia till 1956. I was born in 1942, during the middle of the war. My mother was pregnant with me in Sydney in June of 1942, when a Japanese destroyer went down the coast of Australia, unseen by the Australian Navy that was trying to make sure that the Japanese didn't come down. The Japanese had already bombed Darwin. I don't know if you saw the movie Australia, but the movie Australia with Hugh Jackman and Nicole Kidman depicts that bombing of Darwin very exactly. And it was rather like Pearl Harbor. It was a complete surprise to Australia. Nobody knew it was happening, least of all Darwin, and certainly down in Sydney and Melbourne and the southern states, which is where Australia really had its civilization. They didn't know what was happening to Darwin, and Darwin was virtually destroyed by the Japanese with the aerial bombings of it. Anyway, they had sent ships around Australia, and Australian Navy wasn't strong enough to find out where they all were. And about 20 miles off the coast of Sydney, a destroyer which could not be seen by anybody in Australia was firing on Sydney, trying to hit Sydney. Their big aerial bombs that they were sending from their long guns were landing on the headlands of Manly and Bondi Beach. They didn't strike any buildings at all. They were falling short. But what we didn't know, that whilst they were doing that, they released 5 midget submarines. Those midget submarines found Sydney Harbour, got in, and went right up into where there were American battleships and American medical ships with soldiers that were being brought back from the northern battle that was going on through New Guinea, where the Japanese were attacking New Guinea. And so there were army ships recreating in Australia, and they managed to bomb 3 hospital ships in Sydney Harbour. And my mother was sitting in our front window of our garden apartment that they had on a place called Rushcutters Bay before this beautiful harbour, and she was looking at it, and nobody knew the submarines were there, and then suddenly, boom, this great spout of water went up. She heard the sound and saw this water and the vibration of this bomb, and she was almost about to give birth with me. So she always claims that I am the result of a shell shock. And you know, my life has been like that ever since. Anyway, I was born a couple of days after that attack on Sydney Harbour. They didn't find any of the midget submarines at the time. They have since all been found, the wreckage of them, and strangely enough, there was one found only last year. So they always thought there were 4 midget submarines. They discovered the 5th midget submarine in a place called Newport Reef. I have a house, and my parents had the house, and I took it over later and rebuilt it myself on the northern shores of Sydney. It's 20 miles from Sydney exactly, and then the next headland is Bungan Beach, and the next headland is Newport Beach, which is where the reef went out. I used to skin dive all the time off Newport Reef, but nobody ever saw this. It was right out at the end of the reef, about 40 feet down, this midget submarine. They found it, as I say, about 2 years ago. The Japanese soldiers were still inside it. This is a little piece of history that doesn't mean anything, but that is just interesting to me because I'm a skin diver and did all that kind of stuff too. So I was a very active young man. My father eventually left Australia. A very embattled family relationship. My father, as I said, was a drunk, but he was a functioning drunk. He was very funny to everybody but his family. Everybody, and I still meet people, actors in England that knew my dad, say, "Oh, Johnny Tate, what a wonderful, funny guy he was." And they say, "Didn't you find him funny?" I said, "No, it was my father, and he wasn't funny to me." So anyway, I last saw my dad when I was 16, and we had a bit of a fight. I'd just come back from the surf club, and he'd come back to see us. They were already divorced, and he was given court orders to stay away from us, but he wouldn't do it. The minute he got drunk, he wanted to come back and carry on his marauding. He was a total Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, my dad. He was a wonderful actor. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the magnificent film On the Beach, Stanley Kramer's film from the Neville Shute novel, a novel of the end of the world, where the Northern Hemisphere has suffered the great nuclear disaster that everybody thinks could and still may happen. Well, it happened in his book, and the entire Northern Hemisphere was dead. And Gregory Peck was a submarine captain, and he had been under the North Pole, which, as you know, is not land, it's ocean. The North Pole is just floating icebergs. And so he was protected, apparently, by that amount of iceberg, and they then traveled around the world trying to find if there was any place that wasn't damaged. And of course, they arrived in Australia, and they came into Sydney Harbour, and Sydney had escaped the nuclear holocaust, but the cloud was coming down. And my father played the Admiral of the Australian Navy, which was the biggest Australian role in the film, and he was the only person in the film that was therefore left alive that had any authority until the nuclear submarine, I think it was a nuclear submarine, maybe not nuclear, arrived in Sydney Harbour, captained by Gregory Peck. And they decide that they hear Morse code that's going on in San Francisco. And so they decide they want to send the submarine back to see if there's any life in America. And they come back and they find that there's this crazy Morse code that's going on, and they're getting SOS, and they're getting Shakespeare, they're getting all kinds of really strange words coming out of this thing. And I don't know if you remember the film well enough, but one of the sailors dives into the harbour and swims across to find out what's going on, and he can still hear the Morse code, and he winds his way up through the streets, and then he sees a building, and he knows the Morse code's coming from there. And he goes inside the building, and there's a blind which is attached to a Morse code thing, and the wind is blowing on the blind, and it's going titty 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 from the wind on the wind. And I don't know, what a monkey would write, but why they thought there was any particular words that were coming out of it, I don't know. But it was Neville Shute's cruel trick, and it's a wonderful film. Anyway, my dad played the Admiral of the Navy, and there's a line in the film that I never forgot. My father was this wonderful authoritative figure, and yet I never knew my father as a wonderful authoritative figure. He was either very funny and wonderful company on a boat, but you ever get him anywhere near a pub and other men, he was a monster. And people feared him because he was a tough man. Women loved him because he was apparently charismatic. But I didn't feel like that about him. All I wanted to do was beat my dad up. And he eventually went to England and continued his career and had quite a strong career, and I was left in Australia with my mother. For the first time we had a peaceful life from the age of 16 until I was 23. I spent all that time working out, playing rugby in Australia, joining the surf club and becoming one of the top surfers, and eventually joined the military, and I became a Green Beret in the Australian Army. It's a very difficult thing to do. 86 men went into the intake, and only 18 of us got our Green Berets, and it's the only thing in life that I'm physically really absolutely proud of, because I know how hard it was to do. We ran a 26-mile marathon as a 54 men in a battalion passing army equipment patroons. We had to run it in 5 hours. It's not a marathon like being in the Olympics. It's just a marathon that goes on and on and on while you continue carrying this gear. And you've got sergeants racing up and down, hitting you with batons, telling you to keep going, whilst there are guys far bigger than I am lying on the road vomiting their guts up because they can't do it. I was so proud of that thing when I got there, and the really hard part about it was we went out 26 miles into the outback of Australia. And when we got there, the trucks met us, gave us water bottles and said, "Congratulations, see you back at base." And they drove back. What's 26 and a half miles doubled? Right? 53 miles. We started out at 8 o'clock in the morning. We finished the first run by midday. That was the 26 miles. And then see you back at base, right? And if you tried to hitch a ride in the outback of Australia with the 20 or so men, bedraggled men, I didn't get back till 2 o'clock in the morning because I wasn't going to hurry for anybody, but that's the toughest thing I've ever done. So I eventually started working as a young actor because it was all I knew. I was hopeless at school, couldn't focus because there's too much fighting going on at home, and I wound up doing theatre in Sydney and managed to have quite a bit of success. First play I ever did with any real meat in it was Sweet Bird of Youth, and I played Boss Finley Jr., who castrates the Chance Wayne character in the film. Oh, not in the film, but in the play. I wasn't in the film. I then started getting television work because all the TV producers knew who my parents were, and so it was very interesting that I was like, when you have, if the son of Tom Cruise or daughter, any of the big star actors have children, people give them a break. I can completely admit I was given great breaks. I was given great opportunities. But all I ever wanted to do was be an actor, because I spent so much time in the theatre with my parents and doing all that kind of stuff, and the only thing I could do that was any good at school was show off, and teachers would write reports saying if Nick would only spend as much time with his homework as he does entertaining the rest of the class, he might be a good student. I never did. I never was. I was a hopeless student, and I was even forced to repeat a year, which was totally humiliating to me, that all these kids who was coming up from the next year, I was now going to have to be alongside them. So I didn't want to be there. I left school after my 3rd grade. I didn't even finish high school. I'm a hopeless speller. I'm a great storyteller, although you might not agree with that. But I can tell stories, and I've started writing them, but unfortunately the people that read them go, oh, I can't read this thing because I can't understand anything. Your spelling is horrendous, Nick, you know. So that was a big problem for me. Thank God for spell check in the computers now, because now I can talk into a computer and it writes it for me. Anyway, I've really digressed. So I come to England for the first time in 1965. I have been in 2 television series in a row in Sydney, where I played a lifeguard who saves the heroine of a television show called The Purple Jacaranda. I got quite a bit of notice doing that role because it was a very gung-ho role, and I ride surfboards and used to do all that sort of stuff. And I was very fit. So the following year, there was a totally different television series called My Brother Jack. It was about a young cerebral man who is a wonderful writer, and he's got a brother rather like the character that I played in the other show, where he was a sort of a heroic figure, and his name was Jack. He like me in life, was good at being an athlete, but he had no scholastic abilities, whereas his brother was the bookworm. That's my character. Ed Devereux, a wonderful Australian actor, came back from England to play the Jack of My Brother Jack. And the ABC television, which is rather like the BBC model on the BBC, had watched what I did in The Purple Jacaranda, and they offered me the role of Davy, the man that writes the story of My Brother Jack. And so we were co-leads together. I so enjoyed doing that show with Ed and seeing the principles of how he worked and what a great actor he was. I would come to work with my script in my hand every day and rehearsing as working on the way the BBC used to do plays. You'd rehearse them all week long and then go into the studio in the last 2 days and film them. Television's done quite differently now, because it used to be done live. When I say film them, we used to go on air at 8 o'clock at night and shoot them live. They would record it so that it could be shown later on, but it was done on a different, not a videotape. It was a cinematographic kind of thing. I forget what it was called. So I did My Brother Jack like that, and then I had accepted a challenge from my father, who was now working in England and doing very well with British television, and married again to another lady. And I've got 2 brothers and a sister who are my half-brothers and sisters. Nothing to do with the business, none of them, but I love them all dearly. They're wonderful people. And I was so much older than them when I arrived. When my father left Australia, I was 16, and on the day before he left, he and I had rolled around in the kitchen in a headlock where Scott had just come back from the surf club, and he was a drunk again, and he was in my house, the house that he'd left, and he said, "Oh, g'day, tough guy, you've just come back from the surf club, eh? Here, come here, give us a cuddle, because I'm leaving tomorrow." And he started to cuddle me, and I tried to pull away, and he put me in a headlock, and the 2 of us rolled around on the floor, and he's saying, "Come on, get out of that, tough guy, come on." And I didn't want to fight my father, you know, I really didn't. And the fact that he did that to me was so humiliating to me. So I remember standing up and saying to him, "The next time you try that, I will kill you." And I ran out of the house. I didn't see him for 7 years. He went to England. He became very well known in England, as I said, working with Thunderbirds as part of one of the many things that he did. And he had done the Stanley Kramer film On the Beach before he left. And Kramer had told him to come to America. He said, "You've got to come to America because you'll be a star in America." And he didn't want to come because he loved his pals, he liked his booze, and that's all he wanted to do. So I didn't really want to meet my father because now I had joined the Green Berets. I was an unarmed combat instructor. I was ready to fight anybody that gave me I didn't want to pick fights. I just wanted to stop people like my father from monstering other people when they were drunk. And so when I got off the ship, my father was waiting for me at Tilbury Docks. And if you'd filmed it, you couldn't get it better. You could not see. And a huge thing like an albatross landed on the handrail next to me. And it was the biggest seagull I've ever seen in my life. English seagulls are huge. And then I could hear somebody going out, "Nicky, is that you? Nicky?" I recognized my father's voice. I went down the gangplank, and down there he was. Now, my father was 6 feet tall, and I'm 5'9". My mother and he were smokers and drinkers when I was born, and that's the result of 5'9". My son is 6'1". My brothers are both 6'2". I'm the only dwarf in the family. But I make up for it in other ways. So my dad was standing there, and I walked up to him, and I said, I hadn't seen him for 7 years, and the last time I'd seen him, I said, "Next time you try that on me, I'll kill you." I'd said it in a much more aggressive way than that, but I ran out of the house at that time. Now I was a different human being, and there he was, and he looked at me, he said, "Oh, g'day, mate." And he was huge. He was bloated with alcohol and a great big red beard, and he came down to about 5'10" from the 6 feet that he'd been. And I probably had some lifts in my shoes, so we were the same size. And I was rippling and ready to go, you know. And he grabbed me in a bear hug and crushed me. And I tried to put my arms around him. Couldn't get my arms around him, he was so big. And he pulled back from me, he said, "Come on, let's go and get drunk." And I grabbed him by the shoulders and I pushed him away and I said, "I will never drink with you. Don't ask me to drink with you, or you'll never see me again." "Oh, don't be like that, mate." I said, "No, don't you be like that." So he didn't know what to do with me. "What am I going to do now?" You know, I said, "Well, this is my girlfriend." I met a girl on board the ship who was engaged to be married. She got off the boat with me. I was a wicked human being. She lived with me for 4 years in England. She wasn't an actress, and she's one of the nicest people I've ever known in my life. And sadly, for her and for me, all I wanted to do was be an actor and succeed in a business that was so hard that you couldn't take somebody who's nothing to do with the business with you. At least I couldn't, and I didn't want to, so she didn't stay with me after 4 years. I don't blame her. I was not being a very nice person to her, but I was trying to make my way as an actor. I got a great offer in England to come back to Australia with a musical called Canterbury Tales. I was a singer and a dancer. I've missed out on all that, but I appeared in the Sydney Opera Company in Sydney, playing Amal and the Night Visitors. And so I could sing, but once my voice broke, it wasn't of the same quality. But I wanted to be in musicals because I loved them more than anything, and I'd seen West Side Story, the musical in Sydney, and I'd never been more excited by anything in my life than watching West Side Story. The physicality of that show and the masculinity of the dancing, I just wanted to do that. I wanted to excite and be thrilled by the work I'm in and the sound of the music and the response from the audience. I loved that. So I started seeking theatrical work in London, and my father's agent said to me, "Well, you need to go out and work in the theatres of back reaches, out in the sticks, not in the West End of London. You need to learn your trade. What he didn't know was that I had been in 2 television series in Australia in which I played the co-lead and then the supporting lead in both series. He didn't have anybody that was 23 years of age that had had the kind of television experience I'd had. Most of his young actors had been in theatre, and as far as he was concerned, that was the only way to do it. Go and learn theatre. So I auditioned for a company that was going to Ireland for 6 weeks, and I called the Carl Clope Company, and we went to Cork Opera House and we did The Amorous Prawn, where I played Willie the camp chef of the army. I could play camp roles, and there was the man that played the male lead of the play. He was an alcoholic as well, so used to working with alcoholics that during the rehearsals of the production, whilst I was playing Willie the chef, Carl Clope came to me and he said, "Look, I don't think this man's going to get on stage with us on Saturday night." He said, "Have you learnt his role?" I was his understudy, and here I was, just this young actor. And so I had learnt his role, and I was ready to do it, but I didn't want to do it because it was way ridiculous for me at the age of 23 playing a 50-year-old major in the army in this play. Anyway, the man who had never got a line right throughout all the rehearsals and production, he happened to be the husband of the lead lady of the show, so that's why he was in the company. I couldn't work out why Carl would work with a man like that. Anyway, he went on opening night and he was flawless, and everybody else was completely screwed because we were so worried that he wasn't going to say the next line, but he did. And I got on with playing Willie the chef. I had a wonderful 6 weeks in Ireland. I loved Cork. It was a wonderful place. And I came back to London with my agent saying, "See, what a great experience that was. I told you need theatre." And I wanted to tell him he was raving mad. I was working with people who were drunks and didn't know their lines, and I was way past that in my career. I wanted to be with real people and real actors. So I insisted that I stay in London, and I didn't go out to the sticks. So it was very hard for me because nobody's going to give a young Australian actor a break in London. I remember going up for a production at the BBC, and I managed to disguise my accent because they'd said, "Well, this is an English role." And so I'd walked in and I thought I was being frankly sort of English when I'm doing the role, and she suddenly stopped me and she said, "Where are you from? I don't know where you're from." And I said, "Well, you tell me where I'm from." She said, "Is it South Africa? Are you disguising as South Africa?" I said, "No." And I said, "I'm from Australia." She said, "Oh, yes, I thought I noticed the flat vowels." I thought, Jesus, are you ever going to get a break in this town? Anyway, I went to drama classes, I went to acting classes, I went to dance classes, I went to singing classes. I spent a lot of time working in swimming pools, being lifeguards, and introducing myself to all the young lady typists in Shaftesbury Avenue. And I had a very checkered young career as an actor in London, getting the occasional theatre production, going out to Watford, being in theatre there, occasionally doing an episode of not Murder, She Wrote. I can't even remember the names of shows I was in. It's all very well back in my career. But I eventually went back to Australia with Canterbury Tales, the musical. I knew that there was an actor that was leaving the show, and that he had to be replaced. So I went to see the production, and I rehearsed for the part and auditioned for the part and got it. His name was Nicky Henson, and he played with Peter Sellers and Goldie Hawn in Girl in My Soup in London, in the movie. And they refused to let him have Wednesdays off to film it. So suddenly the theatre had him by the short and curlies and said, "Well, if we let you off on Wednesday matinees to do the play, then you have to sign for another year." So suddenly my having auditioned for his role to replace him didn't mean anything because he was going to stay. So they said to me they were very sorry that they had hired me under false pretenses, but they would offer me to play the role in Australia because they were sending the production to Australia. I thought, what the hell do I want to go back to Australia for? I'm over here in England trying to get work here. But when they told me the money I was going to get, it was going to be £300 a week. I hadn't done anything more than 15, 16 pounds a week, even as a lifeguard in London, and it was hard going. This is 1969 now. But just before I left, I managed to get 2 roles in British films. I played in Submarine X1 with James Caan. I told somebody this story today. Yeah. James Caan was his second film ever. He'd done a film about, he was an astronaut where he goes to Mars, I think. I'm not sure what the film was. But I didn't know who James Caan was. Didn't mean anything to me. He wasn't a star actor to me. And Leslie Tate, who was casting the film, had seen me for a film called Attack on the Iron Coast, where they needed commandos. And because I was a commando in Australia, I went up for the role. And she said, oh no, these are all English commandos. And I said, well, what's that got to do with anything? She said, well, you're not English. And I said, but I'm a commando and you need commandos, right? She didn't believe me and she didn't give me the role. So Mirish Pictures had 3 films they were going to shoot. Attack on the Iron Coast was the first one. The second one was Submarine X1, which was going to star an actor called James Caan. And they wanted frogmen. Well, I was also a frogman because I'd scuba dived a lot, and when you're a Green Barry in Australia, you have to do scuba diving as well. So then I called up, I told my agent, I'm a frogman. He said, you said you were a commander. I said, yeah, well, commanders are frogmen. You know, they've got to do both. He wasn't sure about that, and he couldn't convince Leslie to pet it, and so she wouldn't see me. So I kept on ringing her off and saying, I'm a frogman. But she wouldn't see me. So I heard in the trades that they were auditioning actors at the Wigmore swimming pool. But you had to be able to swim underwater the length of a 50-metre pool, which I could do. So I went down to the Wigmore swimming pool, and there was about 50 young actors all wanting to get into this film with this unknown James Caan. And I swam the length of the pool. About half of them couldn't swim the length of the pool underwater, so they were all sent home. The rest of us they threw these nuts and bolts in the deep end, 16 feet. They said, go down and find a bolt, screw a nut on it and bring it up. And if you can do 2, then do 2. I went down and I found two bolts and about 5 nuts each and screwed them all on. I could stay underwater for 2 minutes. And I came up, and then and all the others had all been up. After I came up, another guy came up longer than I did. His name was Kevin Colson. He was 6'2", fabulous looking man. He'd just been starring in the West End of England in a musical Carnival. And he was great, and I remembered him in Australia. He was a couple of years older than myself. Very good looking guy. He looked a bit like Tab Hunter. He was a match. Tab was not butch, but he looked butch. This guy was butch, and he sang beautifully, and he looked wonderful. So I thought he would get the role. They wanted a frogman in the submarine with James Caan. I got the role, and I thought, how is this? Okay, so he beat me underwater. How did I get the role? Kev Colsby was very good looking, very tall. James Caan's good looking, but he wasn't all that tall. He was maybe 5'11", and it suddenly dawned on me, oh, maybe it's okay that I'm not so tall, because I got the role of the frogman. So I worked with James Caan, and how that happened was on day 1, I went up to Scotland, and we were staying in an old hotel in Scotland where they were going to shoot it. In Inverness, which is where Loch Ness is, Nessie the monster. We shot the whole film in Loch Ness, which was supposed to be the Norwegian fields, because the story was really about the sinking of the Tirpitz. It's a true story. It was the German destroyer that was mowing down lots of English craft and American craft because it was invincible. And they thought the only way they could get it was to go underwater with midget submarines and plant a, if you could find it anywhere. It was located in the Norwegian fjords, and the British Air Force sent in midget submarines, and they sank the Tirpitz. So this was a retelling of that story in its own way. And on my first day, I'm in the hotel, and I'm told everybody's having a drink in the bar. So I go down into the bar, and they're all drinking this English beer, which I didn't like, and I didn't really drink anyway, because my dad was a piss pot. I was as fit as a fiddle, and I never wanted to drink and get drunk with anybody. But I decided, you know, I talked to the barman, you know, what can I have? And he said, we got Foster's Lager here. You're an Australian? I went, oh, okay, Foster's Lager. So there was a bloke standing next to me, and he says, what are you drinking? And I said, Foster's Lager. He said, it's not like that English piss, is it? And I said, no, that's an Australian beer. Are you Australian? I said, yeah. And he said, I said, well, you know about beer. He said, let's try your Foster's. So I gave him the Foster. He went, yeah, that's bloody good. Get me one. So I said, give us Foster's for my mate here, right? So I started drinking with this bloke. He was a really good guy. I was convinced he must have been one of the crew, but he's kind of had an American accent. Anyway, I was getting on really, really well with him. And then the director comes in. Now, the director starts walking towards this little guy. His name was Billy Graham, right? And the evangelist Billy Graham was very big at the time, but this guy was Billy Graham. Now, he was the spitting image of the guy that was in Bullet.
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen. He was Steve McQueen's stuntman, and he was the guy that rode the motorbike into the barbed wire. He looked like Steve. He wore the same hat that Steve used to wear, physically identical to him. So he was a great screen double. He was the director of this film because he'd come from stunts, and he knew Jimmy Caan very well. So he comes in, and Jimmy says, oh, here comes the director. And I go, yeah, what a prick. What's he say? And I said, he's a prick. And he says, hey, Billy, come over here. This guy thinks you're a prick. I'm thinking, oh, holy shit, what have I done? Who is this guy? Billy comes over, throws his arms around this guy. They go to the big bear hug, and I'm thinking, I'm dead, what's going on? I didn't know this was James Caan. I never met him in my life, you know? But I was already instant friends with this guy, you know? I want him in my submarine, he said. So I was in the submarine with James Caan. He adopted me straight away. He was great to me. The attachment to that story is, I didn't see Jimmy for 10 years. Then I get into Space 1999, and I'm in the commissary having lunch one day, and James Caan, a huge movie star, comes to make Rollerball at Pinewood Studios. And he walks in, and all the guys that I'm having lunch with, who are fellow actors in Space 19, we're all in our gear, right? Having lunch in the commissary, and they go, uh-oh, here comes that Burke, James Caan, you know, and he's rollerball crap over there, look at him. I said, he's not a Burke, he's a good guy. How would you know? I said, he's a mate of mine. Oh, bullshit, he's a mate of yours. I said, he's a mate of mine. Well, ask him out. Go on, ask him over. Big shot. He's not a mate of yours. I said, he is. And he said, well, why don't you go? And I said, well, because I'm not going to bother him, you know. And they go, oh, bullshit. So we're talking away. I'm having a steak, right? I'm cutting, and it's about 10 minutes, I'm cutting into my steak. And as I poke the piece of meat, up my hand comes over my head like that, grabs my hand and goes like that, and Jimmy goes, "Hello, Nicky. How are you, buddy?" And they're all gone. I jump up and said, Jimmy, oh, he said, come over with me. I go walk over. So that's James Caan, you know, he was a wonderful guy. I did know him. He didn't know what I was doing. He said, so you're in something with Marty Landau? I said, yeah, I love Marty, you know. But Martin wasn't in the room at the time. Had another time with Jodie Foster, same thing. But Jodie Foster was eating lunch, and she saw me. She walks over to me and she says, I love you in that show, Space 1999. I said, oh, thank you so much. She said, do you know Martin? I said, of course I do. She said, I'd love to meet him. She was 13. She was doing Bugsy Malone. Do you remember that movie? Right? And I'd seen her in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, so I knew who she was. So I take her to the set, and she said she had the afternoon off, or had an hour, and could she come and see us? So I said to the first assistant, can Johnny phone? Yeah, so they go and ask Martin. He says, of course. So she comes in and watches us work. I've still got that daily worksheet where it's written on the top, you know, what we had to shoot for the day, and thank you for letting me meet Martin and Barbara on Space 1999 with you, Alan Carter. I love you, Jodie Foster. And it was just a nice memory. You know, I haven't followed up on any of these people. I didn't, when I came to America, I didn't ring them up and say, hey, I finally come, you know, can you introduce me to some friends? I didn't bother, you know. I just went on my own way. But now I've completely digressed from how I got to being asked to play. This is what I do in life. So anyway, I've gone back to Australia. I've been in England, went back to Australia with Canterbury Tales, did 2 years on Canterbury Tales, nearly 2 years. I was offered another television series at the end of I had a 12-month contract. It's hard to work out a 12-month contract because my producer argued that a 12-month contract meant that I'd have to work for 52 weeks. And we didn't work for 52 weeks on Canterbury Tales. We would do 4 months here and then take a couple of weeks off while we traveled from Sydney to Melbourne on a train, taking all the sets, setting it all up, and then doing rehearsals for the crew and everything else, and then starting again. We do 4 months in Melbourne, then we do 4 months in Adelaide, then we do 4 months in Brisbane, then we do 4 months in Perth, and then we back to Sydney and do another 3 months, and so it went. I did 418 performances of Canterbury Tales, 8 performances a week, 2 on Wednesday, 2 on Saturday, in one of the most grueling shows I've ever been in my life. 32 people singing and dancing in the funniest, most wonderfully written by Chaucer Canterbury Tales. It was I'm going as fast as I can. It was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life because there were 32 people in the cast, 16 men and 16 women. I correct when I say 16 men. There were 2 men and 14 gay guys. Well, of course they're men, but I had a wonderful time in that show. There were a lot of very beautiful girls in the dance group, and it was just 2 years of absolute bliss. The other man in the show was an acrobat, but he was a great dancer, and he'd been in Las Vegas for many years as part of the Flying Bell Karens. His sister was an acrobat, and her husband was an acrobat, and they did this threesome act and he was great at the stock market. And so Ian and I became firm pals on that show, and he taught me how to buy stocks and shares. That's still not the same story. Right, okay, so I finished Canterbury Tales in Australia, and whilst I was doing Canterbury Tales in Australia, my father, who'd now become my friend, because I'd sorted him out and we'd had our differences. And I recognized how hard it must be living with my mother, who, while she was a wonderful actress, her drive and her intensity and her understanding of the business was so strong that my father's lackadaisical, everything's going to be all right. My father was a magical actor, but he just played himself. He was kind of like a, I don't even know who to tell you. He just was who he was. He didn't play characters that were far away from who he was. He was good at being authority figures, even though he wasn't an authority figure. He was much more of a scallywag. And the girls loved him, and all his mates loved him. But it was hard having a father like that. So, Canterbury Tales, and my father had said he'd love to come back to Australia and spend some time. When I was doing Canterbury Tales, a producer that I knew very well, called Eric Taylor, was about to do a big television series in Australia called Dynasty. It was about the Packer family, and I don't know if you know about the Packers, but they ran all the newspapers in Australia, and they had their only opposition was a man called Murdoch, who ran the other big newspapers in Australia. he had a son who was a playboy and loved being a playboy, didn't want to work. His name was Rupert. And Rupert was very charismatic, and a friend of mine was best friends with him. And the two of them used to go around marauding the city. When Rupert's father suddenly became very, very ill, the newspaper empire was threatened greatly, and Rupert was summoned to come in and take over from his father. He didn't want to do it. He was only about 26 years of age, and that wasn't what he hadn't planned in life. But he went in and he completely changed, and his playboy qualities vanished. All his friends were persona non grata, including my friend who knew him, who used to love going to parties with him and going over to Europe and doing on the horseback hockey. Polo, water, horse polo. Not water polo and not hockey, but the combination of both, but on horses, on land. And they would play with princes in Saudi Arabia and all over the place. Rupert had the most extraordinary lifestyle until he became the great head of the newspapers in London. And then he came to America and he's head of everything now, you know. Well, Rupert Murdoch led this huge company, and the man that wrote this series of Dynasty in Australia wrote about a father who was a tyrant and his sons who ran the television and the newspaper magazines. So Eric asked me if my dad would come back and play this role. I knew my father would love to play the role, but he didn't like learning lines, so he didn't want to do it. But I wrote to him and said, Dad, you can have anything you want. Eric will give you anything you want to come back and play this role. He wanted Leo McKern to do it. He couldn't get Leo McKern. I don't know if you know who Leo McKern was, but he was a wonderful Australian actor that played Rumpole of the Bailey in the British BBC series for years. Wonderful actor. He was also Cromwell in Man for All Seasons, a film that I was also in that I didn't mention, but I only had a very small role in it. But I played with Paul Schofield. That was the guard on his cell, and I had to take him to his inquisitions and take him to his eventual beheading. So I had some very nice contacts in England. I'd work with some wonderful people. I worked with Robert Shaw and Susanna York and Paul Schofield in Man for All Seasons. I remember when we all went to lunch during the inquiries of Man for All Seasons, and the only person that stayed in the studio was Paul Schofield. He didn't go into the commissary and eat lunch. He stayed there. And I remember I was kind of stayed behind one time, and I said, excuse me, Paul, everybody's gone to lunch. Do you not want lunch? And he said, and he opened up his lunchbox. He said, my wife makes me my sandwiches. And I said, but don't you want to be with everybody? He said, no, I do not want to be with everybody. He had such a huge, he won the Oscar for the role, right? He had such a huge, but his name was not first. Wendy Hillier's name was first. Robert Shaw's name was first, playing King. Because Paul Schofield, whilst he was playing the lead, and he played this role for 2 years in the West End of London, they had to give him the role because he was genius at it, but he wasn't a film actor. He had done films, but he wasn't known as a film actor. So he didn't get the lead role, but he won the Oscar for the role. So here this man is saying to me, no, I don't want to go and have lunch with these people, because he's so focused on this performance that he had to give. People don't sometimes realize what it means for an actor when they're all playing around and clowning about. I used to have people do it to me when I was doing space. I'm supposed to be out in space flying an aircraft with nothing in front of me, right? And I'm in the spacecraft looking out, and there's all the crew. There's like 50 people out there, and some of them are going like this, and some of them are grabbing each other by the balls, and just doing stupid things. And I'm in the middle of this incredible moment where I'm alone with God in space, you know. And there's somebody trying to jerk somebody else off over in a corner. I'm going, and Charlie Crank said, "What are you doing, Nick? Why have you stopped?" I said, "Because he's jerking off over in the corner." "Stop doing that, you prick!" I was a very outspoken actor. They didn't. Most actors don't behave like that in England. But Martin was very much the lead of the show. He was wonderful. He was funny, charismatic. Had many more stories than I've got. I'm not sure about that. But he very funny guy and lovely to be with. But there was another side to Martin, that Martin was the boss. He didn't want us to know he was the boss, not we actors, because he always wanted things done his way. He had every right to. He was far more experienced than all of us, and he was marvelous. But there was some sides to him. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Martin, because Martin is one of the people that put me in the show. I know that. The reason why that is because when they were coming to cast Space 1999, I had been in Australia doing a play called Don's Party, which was one of the funniest, most rewarding plays I've ever been in my life. I remember having standing ovations of 12 curtain calls in Canterbury Tales. There's nothing more intoxicating in life than having 12 curtain calls with audiences standing and shouting and applauding. It is so thrilling. I had it happen in Canterbury Tales for 18 months, and then the next time was about 5 years later in Don's Party, where I played the lead role in a very, very funny comedy, theatrical, political story, Don's Party. Robert Morley, one of the great English actors, came to Australia to perform, and he came to see Don's Party, and he asked to meet the cast afterwards. We were all told to stay behind. Now, to us, Robert Morley was like Jesus Christ. He was like this wonderful, iconic figure of comedy who wanted to meet the cast. And he came round and he shook all our hands on stage. And he said, "This play is golden. You are all unspeakably brilliant in this play. You must come to London. I want to bring this play to London. And I've asked young Nick to come and play Don in London. How many of you will come?" And practically everybody put their hands up. So Robert went back to England. He secretly bought the rights to Don's Party. He wanted to put it on in London. And he had asked me out to dinner one day. I went out to dinner with him. I didn't know how or why. And he said, "I want you to come and do this for me in London." So when Don's Party finished in Sydney, I was offered a television series called Boney, which I turned down. I'd already been in Boney, and I didn't want to continue playing the idiot policeman I was playing. I wanted to come to London and do this, to do Don's Party. So I left England, Australia, and I came to England. I'd been in England before, as I told you, but I came home to do Canterbury Tales, and then Dynasty, and then a couple of pilots for television series that I did, one of which was a thing called The Chaser, about a private investigator who doesn't always get his man, and doesn't always win the races or the fights, and doesn't always get the girl. But he's a funny, charismatic loser. And I loved the role. But because it didn't have a kind of like a beautiful heroine and a gorgeous sort of James Bondish style lead actor, but it was more about comedy. It was kind of like the television series where Peter Columbo. My character wasn't that disheveled, because he was young and fairly attractive. I think I was fairly attractive in those days. And they wanted that. They wanted this guy to not always win, and sometimes he'd have to take a punch to go down, and he'd race out to jump in his car to chase somebody to find he had a flat tire. There was always something wrong, you know. It was funny, and it was dramatic, and it was a great pilot for a television series. And there was a man called Bruce Gingell who ran Channel 7 who produced it and wanted it to happen, but they didn't do it because they surrendered to another series about a guy who was a sort of rip-off from James Bond, and that happened instead. So I kind of was pissed off with Australia that they wouldn't take the courage to do a show like this. And here I was being offered to go to England and do Don's Party. So I thought, I'm going to go back to England. And I had a girlfriend at the time who loved England. She was English. And she said to me, you weren't ready for England then. You're ready for it now. You must go. So I came back to England, and I was about to do Don's Party. And there was a delay. The director had signed some other contract for 12 months. So I'd come back to do this play in England, and the director couldn't do it for 12 months. And they said, sorry, can you wait? And I've arrived, and I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And I'm wandering around the streets, and I went to the Australian Bank, and the head producer of Boney was walking out of the door, and his name is John McCallum, and he was married to Googie Withers. And he'd done a television series called Skippy in Australia, and then he did Boney, of which I was a policeman in Boney. He wanted me to continue with the second series of Boney. And I said no, because I was doing Don's Party. Are you keeping up with me?
Yes.
And then here I've come to England to do Don's Party, and I bumped into the same producer. He said, I was a big, bang, 6'4", elegant man. He said, good God, Nick Tate, what are you doing here? I said, I've told you I've come to do Don's Party. And he said, and how's that working out for you? And I said, well, they're not doing it for a year. Oh, tut, tut, tut. He said, I'm having lunch with Bruce Gingell today. Do you know him? And I said, yeah, I did a pilot called The Chaser for him. Oh, did you? So you do know him? And I said, yeah, yes, I do. So, shall I tell him that you're here? And I said, I don't know what good it will do, but yeah, okay, fine, thank you, John. Oh, I wish you'd done Boney for me. I said, well, I'm sorry. Anyway, that was that. I go home. Later that afternoon, the phone rings, and a woman says, is there Nick Tate there? I said, yes. She said, I have Mr. Gingell on the phone for you. Now, I've told you that Bruce Gingell was the head of the Channel 7 in Sydney, and he produced me in The Chaser, but I didn't really know him. I thought because it didn't go ahead that he mustn't have wanted it to go ahead. So he comes, g'day, Nick? And I go, yes, Mr. Gingell? It's not Mr. Gingell, mate, it's Bruce. Come on, mate, for Christ's sake. Just been talking to John. He said, mate, I love what you did for me in The Chaser. I said, you did? He said, yeah, you were fucking great in it, mate. He said, look, I know a lot of people. I've just come over here right now. He said, Lou Grade has hired me as his right-hand man, and he's now become Lord Grade, incidentally. He's got a show called Space 1999. It's about people on the moon. He said, you'd be great in that. I went, yes, I would, yes. And he said, well, I've got that, and then I've got, there was a sport thing about soccer, I forget what it was called in England at the time, soccer show, and he told me all these shows he was producing. And he said, I'm going to introduce you to a lot of people. And I'm thinking, am I asleep? What's going on? This guy is like, I didn't know that he liked me that much. And suddenly here he is offering me all this work. So I said, well, thank you, Bruce. What am I going to do? You see, you wait, and we'll call you, all right? A couple of days later, I get a call from my agent. I'm to go down and meet the Andersons. But before I'm to go down and meet them, I've got to go and audition for Nottingham Theatre. They're doing Streetcar Named Desire, and they want somebody to play Stanley Kowalski. Now, the last person that played Stanley Kowalski was Marlon Brando, and it made his life. So I'm thinking, oh, this is a nice offer. So I go in to meet them, and I audition for Stanley Kowalski for Streetcar Named Desire to be done in Nottingham, and I get the part. So now I'm going, oh, well, that happened after I went to see the Andersons. So I go to see the Andersons, and I go down to Space 1999, and I walk around, and they're all the actors there, they're doing it, they're all in the space gear, and they've got all the thing, they're rehearsing, and I see all the sets, and it's very exciting. And Sylvia invites me in because she knows my father, and she'd worked with him in Thunderbirds. So she says, I love Johnny Tate. She said, oh, you look just like a young Johnny Tate. She said, and Sylvia was a very good-looking woman and a lovely person. I liked her instantly. She said, oh, what a shame, Nick, we're totally cast in this show. I don't know why Bruce thought that we could use you. She said, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do about it. So, and I said, well, yeah, can't be helped. I might be playing footballer in the soccer show. She said, "Oh, that would be good." I'd been up there. I didn't tell you that, but I went up to Manchester and I met with them, and they decided they wanted me, and I had to meet with the writers, and they started to write for an Australian soccer player, which there weren't any. But anyway, and I didn't know how to play soccer, but I was a good rugby player, so I could fake it, I thought. So anyway, that was building, and I had the audition for. I'd done the audition for Streetcar Named Desire, but I didn't know I'd got the role yet. And I'm talking to the Andersons, and Sylvia says to me, "It would be interesting to have you come on board and just play one of the pilots. You never know. It could be useful." And the casting director was not keen on that idea because he'd cast all the production and he didn't know me, and he wanted to know who the people were at the beginning. His name was Brian Barnes, and he said, I don't think that's going to work, Sylvia. That's not quite what we're looking for. And she said, "Michael, if Nick wants to do it, we should let him. Would you like to do it, Nick?" And I said, "Do what?" She said, "Well, you be one of the pilots that's dumping the nuclear waste that explode." And he said, "And you die." And I died. She said, "Well, he doesn't have to die." And Michael goes, "Oh, I don't know, Sylvia." So anyway, I left knowing that Sylvia liked me, and there was the possibility of me playing a pilot that didn't die. And then I go off and I audition for Streetcar Named Desire, and it goes really well. And my agent rings me up and says, "They want you in Nottingham." And I said, but what about the science fiction Space 1999? He said, "Well, what about the soccer thing you're supposed to be doing? How many shows do you want to do, Nick?" And I said, "Well, I want to do the best one." And he said, "Well, that's clearly Streetcar Named Desire, for God's sake. You know, that's what I've told you before. This country's all about theatre. That's what you need to do. Go and do it." I said, "I don't know. I like the idea of Space 19. I just want to be in a sci-fi show." "But you're not playing a role. You're just going to get blown up in it." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know. I got a feeling in my gut about this, you know." So I turned down the soccer film series, and I turned down Streetcar Named Desire to come on a show where I'm going to be killed. And I'm going to maybe work for 3 weeks rehearsal with these people. The director is a man called Lee J. Katzen. And he knew Billy Graham, and he knew all the people that I'd worked with before. And we start workshopping Space 1999. I meet Morton and I meet Barbara, and I get on very well with Morton. We discover our birthdays are 2 days apart. And Morton says, "You know," he says, "you're an Aussie." He said, "You get me." He says, "A lot of these English actors in the show, they don't really get me. But you must have, how does he know so much about America?" I said, "Because we grew up watching nothing but American television in Australia, you know." So, and I said, "You ask a kid who's the Prime Minister of Australia," he says, "President Nixon." I'm not kidding you. I mean, that's what it was like. So, yeah, and I've got an ear, so I was listening to the accents a lot. And I was dreaming and hoping something would happen. And I'm giving my everything to all the practices, because Lee is workshopping things and having us run and jump and carry in different lines and ad-lib lots of stuff. And I bounced off Morton quite a bit and listened to some of his stories. And he asked me what I'd done, and so you've been doing a lot of television. He said, "I've noticed the way you work in front of camera." He said, "You're very comfortable in front of camera." I said, "I love it, Morton. I just love it." He said, "Yeah." And then Lee said to me one day, "Do you want to have lunch with me tomorrow?" And I'm thinking, is he gay? Why does the director of my show want to have lunch with somebody who's virtually an extra? So and he said to me, you did some work in Australia, right?" And I said, "Or film work." And I said, "It wasn't really film, it was television, which we should like film in Australia." And he said, "Have you got any documentation, any footage?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Bring it along." So I took my stuff, showed him my book. I had a front page cover of TV Week with my father and myself and the 2 boys that played our brothers. in Dynasty. He said, what's this, Dynasty? He said, that's not our show. And I said, no, we made this a long time ago. It's called Dynasty in Australia. It's about the Packer family, moguls, and all the powerful, and the infighting. It's very like Succession is today, but we shot that back then. And he says, oh, I like the look of that, and you got front page. Who's this guy? I said, that's my dad. That's your dad? And I said, yeah, you come from a dynastical, theatrical family? I said, yeah. He said, I don't want to lose you. I swear to God. This man is saying, you don't want to lose me. I'm thinking, I got to do this. So I'm thinking, well, how am I going to survive amongst all of this, you know, because I'm just playing a guy that's going to die. And one day I come to the studio, and there's all these actors standing outside the casting director's office, and they've all got dark hair, they all look Italian. And I walk in and say, what's going on? They said, the Italian actor's not coming, playing the chief astronaut. And we're about to start work the following week. And everybody's waiting for this Alphonse Catani. That's the name of the character, Captain Alphonse Catani, Italian captain of the pilots. He's not showing up. And Lee comes out and he says, Nick, do you want to come in and audition? I said, what am I doing? He said, you do Italian? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, here, look, 3 pages, quick, learn that. I'll call you in about 20 minutes, okay? And this is the director, right? And everybody's outside going, what's going on, you know? So I'm seeing these Italian actor type people walk in and walk out. So I come in eventually, and Lee says, okay, I got an idea. I think, you know, could be interesting for Nick. Sylvia says, what's Nick doing in here? Well, you know, he can do Italian. And she says, he's Australian, he can't do Italian. I'm looking at Sylvia thinking, you didn't talk to me the other day like that, you know, why is it like this? So I do my, you know, half a pound of potato tomato, you know, my Italian, like a restaurateur, you know, it's terrible performance. And I know that I've completely lost it. So he goes, wait a minute, okay, this is an international moon base, right? We got Italians, we got Chinese, let's have a German. Do you do German? You do German, don't you? Because he looks German, right? It doesn't look German. He does look German. Okay, can you do German? Yeah, we will ask the questions. So I do my So I'm doing my German, right? And he's going, no. So then he says, oh, for Christ's sake, he said, look, he's Australian, just do it Australian. And Sylvia says, there's no Australians on the moon. I said, there's no bloody British on the moon either, Sylvia. And he says, right on. See, look, now get that attitude. See, that's the attitude we want from this guy. He's got the attitude. He looks good. Come on, do it Australian. You want to rehearse? I said, no, I'll do it Australian. I'll do it Australian. He goes, see, that's it. That's what we want. We want that arrogance. And Sylvia says, go home, Nick. I said, go home? Yeah, go home. Get out of here before I lose it. I'm thinking, Jesus, okay, thank you very much. And Lee goes, I walk out the door. I go home. My phone rings at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My agent said, what did you do? I said, what? He said, you got the role. I couldn't believe it. That's how Alan Carter was born. Now, Martin always told me that from the minute he met me, he knew he wanted me to play that role. And he said that he talked to the Andersons and he told them that he didn't want the Italian actor because he didn't know him. But somebody later told me that Martin doesn't. I know that you probably all love Martin, and I loved Martin too. But it's like loving a dog that wants to bite another dog, you know? Martin didn't like tall, good-looking guys. And the guy that was going to play Alphonse Catani was 6'2". He was built like a brick shithouse, and he was very good-looking. And Martin was not going to have that man on screen. Right? He didn't care about this little 5'9", funny Australian kid. He liked me. He wanted me in the show to his own advantage, you know, because I used to go, you know, Commander, I have to talk to him like that. And he goes, oh, yes, Alan, you know. And that's what he liked. And you know what? I liked it. I didn't know at the time that that's what was going on. It was this thing. He'd been in Mission Impossible with 4 other guys that were all 6'7", and he was 6'2", and he hated it. And he got bounced out of Mission Impossible, and so it was bad memories for him. He was not going to have another tall actor in the show with him, right? So that was to my advantage that he didn't like tall actors. It was to my advantage that Jamie Caan didn't want a tall actor in the submarine with him. So sometimes being a dwarf's pretty good. I've taken up your time, and I don't know that if there's any time for any questions or if I've not made myself clear about this, but Sylvia Anderson always claimed that she wanted me in the show because she loved my father. She told me that later on. Martin wanted me in the show because he didn't want the good-looking American. Lee Katzin wanted me in the show because he wanted to have some say in any of the casting, and he never got any say in it until me. There were several other people who put their finger in the pie and said they made that decision too. I can tell you that the casting director did not want me in the show because I had barged my way in. Well, on the day that I came out to meet the casting director, I had to meet Sylvia first because she'd left a note saying she wanted to see me. I got in to see Michael, but this is the first day before I ever got to meet Sylvia. I got out there and Michael Barnes said to me, look, I don't know why Bruce Skinshaw has sent you because there aren't any roles in the show. I've cast everything and we're completely closed. We might be able to give you guest roles somewhere along the line, but there's really nothing in the show at all right now, so I'm sorry, you know. I said, can I see Sylvia? He said, no, that's not going to be possible. She's very busy. So he said, come with me. And he walked out the door, down the corridor, and there was a door that said Sylvia Anderson, half a crack. And there was a woman sitting in there on the phone with sort of strawberry-coloured hair. And I stopped and I looked at her, and she looked at me. And Michael went, come. And I'm going, Sylvia? She goes, yes. I said, I'm Nick Tate, John Tate's son. Johnny Tate's son! Michael Barnes, come away from there! Sylvia, can I talk to you? Yes, come in. I'm sorry, Sylvia, he's barged his way in. I've told him it's all cast, right? You know, there's nothing in the show for him, right? That's what I should have told you that part of the story earlier on, but Michael did not want me in that show. When they did the second series of Space 1999, Michael Barnes was fired. They hired another casting director that hated me, the woman that did Attack on the Iron Coast and Submarine X1. That casting director, I told you her name earlier on, gone right out the window on me. I got those roles again without a casting director. I was the one that swam and dived under the water, you know, and impressed the director at the time. And casting directors don't like actors pushing their way in when they can't claim, I discovered him, because it's all my creation, you know. They don't like that. And then in the second series of Space 1999, we were told there wasn't going to be a second series. We were told before we finished the first series that sadly we're not picking the show up, so it's goodbye. We all went our separate ways. I was offered a film in Australia called The Devil's Playground, which I went back to do, and I won the AFI award in Australia for that. It was about a Catholic seminary. And Fred Skepsey, who's a wonderful Australian director, he directed me in that. He directed 6 Degrees of Separation here. He directed Barbarossa. There's so many wonderful films that Fred has directed. But he won the Director's Fortnight for The Devil's Playground, and he and I both won Best Actor and Best Director for The Devil's Playground in Australia. It was one of the greatest delights of my life playing that role, an alcoholic priest. I knew how to play alcoholics. I wasn't too sure about priests, but I made a pretty good fist of it. But the second series of Space 1999, sadly, as we all know, didn't have Sylvia, and I was very upset that Gerry had divorced her. But I know for her own right that it was best for her. And whilst I was in Australia shooting The Devil's Playground, I got a call from Gerry Anderson saying he needed me back in America, in England immediately, because he was about to shoot a pilot for a series that he was going to make for the BBC, a sci-fi pilot called The Day After Tomorrow, Into Infinity, and he wanted me to play the lead in it. Gerry Anderson, who I thought didn't like me, who I thought Sylvia liked me too much, and Gerry didn't like that. And here he was offering me the lead in this show. I said, Gerry, you sure you want me? And he said, yeah, why wouldn't you think I do? I said, I don't know, Gerry, but I thought you might not want me. And he said, well, I do want you, Nick. And he said, you're right for this. And he said, if we go ahead, we've got a series. And he said, you don't have to worry about having lost Space 1999. What I didn't know was that Space 1999 was smouldering away. It wasn't dead. And a person called Fred Freiber. sorry. That happens to me accidentally every now and again. A person called, you know what I said, was trying to put together a second series of Space 1999. He came to Gerry and he said, I can do it for you. Gerry didn't want to do it because of all the connections. And he said, no, I know this can work. I pick up damaged shows and I fix them. He picks up damaged shows and he kills them. That's what he does. And he said something to me, because when Gerry asked me to come out to see him finally, I knew the show was done, everybody had been recast, nobody from the original cast was back. Barry Morse was gone, Prentice was gone, Xenia was gone, I was gone, we're all gone. And other actors had said to me, why are you gone? You were the only person that people were asking to come to sci-fi conventions. The fans love you, you know, why, or Alan Carter, why, you know, don't they know what they're doing? So I couldn't understand why Gerry would go ahead with this new idea and not want me. And then Gerry calls me personally saying, will you come and see me? Or his secretary called me and said, Gerry wants to see him. I said, can I talk to him? No, he wants you to come out and see him. I said, isn't your show about to start? She said, yes, next week. So I think, okay, so he's going to tell me why he didn't cast me. So I want to go and find out, because I'd done the pilot for the other show for him and he treated me very well and we got on very well. We made a nice little pilot for the show. I love Brian Blessed. I love doing that show, for those of you that ever saw it. So come out and I talk with Gerry and he says to me, Nick, the producer is that person's name that I said, and he, for his own reasons, I've let him have his head, because he really is the one that's bringing the money in from America, and that's the way they wanted it. I said, what, America didn't want me either? Didn't you fight for me, Gerry? And he said, of course I fought for you, Nick, but I really don't have control. He said, just like in the first series where you always thought that I had the control. I didn't have the control. I'm not the person that makes those decisions. It was Morton that had all the control all the time. So I said, so with the second series, now that none of us are in it, Morton has agreed to that too. And he said, I didn't say that. I said, you didn't say that, Gerry, but it must be so. Morton is the one that had all the control. Does he still not have all the control? He said, no, Freddie Freiberger's got the control. I said, so Freddie and Morton have made all these decisions. He said, I wouldn't say that. I said, okay, well then stop telling me what you wouldn't say. I'm telling you what I know has happened. And is that the kind of environment that I should be coming into? Because you gave me no money. I had the least money of the show, because everybody else was contracted to play the first series. I wasn't. I came in at the last minute playing a role where I was going to be killed, and I worked on the day rate, no overheads, nothing whatsoever. I got the minimum payment to play Alan Carter, but would I have changed it for 1 minute? No, I would not. Okay, I wasn't paid very well, but I've made a lot of friends in the world, and I enjoyed every second of Space 1999. It's been the greatest pleasure of my life. The fact that it hasn't exactly worked out the way we all wanted it to, the network stuff, it's been never networked anywhere except for the BBC when they played it, and we all got paid once again, but that was after 25 years. And I know that, you know, Morton and Barbara have made many millions off the show. When I first came to America, Morton asked me out to Nate Nels. So I went to Nate Nels with him. He said, well, Nicky, he said, you know, but Barbara and myself have made our first million individually each from the residuals. And I said, that's wonderful for you, Martin. And he said, well, what about you? I said, what about me, Martin? He said, well, you've done well, surely. I said, Martin, you know that you had syndicated rights. You, Barbara, and Barry Morse, I believe. Uh-huh. I said, no, nobody in the British cast had syndicated rights. Nobody. I think you know that, Martin. He said, no, Nicky, of course I didn't know. I wouldn't have brought it up. Bullshit. But that's what Martin was like. He was a big dog with his own bone, and he was so funny to me and so kind to me and so generous to me. I know that he spoke up for me, but I've told you why he spoke up for me now, because he wanted that funny little blonde guy, not the big, tall, dark guy, you know. I wouldn't have said any of these things back then. I'm saying them now, because they're going to be in my memoirs. Any questions? Hello.
Hey, can you relate the story about the contact lenses from Next Generation?
Contact.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I've heard something about you had some sort of deal with the contact lenses that you were using, or you were going to be transferred part.
Oh, right. Yes. Star Trek.
Yeah.
I got an episode of Next Generation. Junior Lowry brought me in for several things, and I finally got Durgo in Next Generation, which was a great pleasure. I never worked with Jonathan Frakes in it, but I worked near him. He saw what I did with the episode, and I've had many a compliment for playing Durgo in that show, and it was one of the thrills of my life to work with Patrick Stewart. He was charming and a wonderful man, and I never heard from them again. Well, why would I? When Durgo was Durgo. Several years later, Jonathan Frakes was given the rights to direct some shows, and he brought me in for a wonderful episode of Next Generation, playing a totally different character. I had been worried about coming on and doing a show where clearly nobody wore glasses, and so I wanted to get contact lenses so that I could look like I was in the modern future. You know, people won't be wearing glasses. Like, I'm not wearing glasses now, but I got contact lenses implanted in my eyeballs. Maybe some of you have got the same thing. I have fabulous contact. They're not contact lenses. They're plastic lenses, which are multifocal. I can read right here, and I can see you, and I can see a golf ball very important, 350 yards away. Not that I hit it, I tell my friends where it is. Anyway, Jonathan brought me in, and I had gone to an eye optometrist. I said, I need contact lenses immediately. And he gave me contact lenses, and we put them in, and they were in agony. So the next day, I tried to put them in myself, and I went to the audition, and I'm sitting outside, and I get him in, and I've got the left one in the right eye and the right one in the left eye. And I walk up inside, and I'm going, I got my glasses in here, and I'm trying to learn these lines, and now my voiceover career is going gangbusters. I'm working on voiceovers all over the place. I'm driving from here to there, and I'm nearly killing myself in the car because I got to drive with one eye, and it's the wrong contact lens, and it's just monstrous. And I arrive at the audition, and I haven't learnt the lines properly, but I go upstairs, I think, I'm an actor, I can do this, I'll fake it, you know. I walk in, Jonathan says, Nick, Tate, we loved you in the show. So Nick doesn't need the introduction, come on, do it for us. Go. And I start and I dry. And I'm going, I'm sorry, folks. All right, no, let's do that again. Can we go again? He says, yeah. He says, Nick, read the script. I say, what? He said, yeah, you see the script? You got it in your pocket, right? I go, yeah, sorry, okay. I start to read, I'm all over the place. He said, put your glasses on, Nick. So I put my glasses on. Now I'm really screwed. I said, sorry, guys. Contact lens problem here. They go, oh, yeah, sorry. You know, I could have, don't worry, we'll call you. They ring my agent and say, gee, Nick's really lost it, hasn't he? Could have been my career end. Fortunately for me, about, I don't know, 6 months later, I go to Canada and I shoot an episode of FX with Cameron Dado, who's playing the role that Brian Brown made famous in the movie. And they wanted an Australian, because Cameron's an Australian, Brian Brown was Australian, and so the father of the FX guy got to be an Australian. One of the greatest roles ever written for me was the father of the FX guy. I did this role in Canada, one episode. He is a nightmare father for any man to have. He's kind of like 75 going on 14. He wants all the girls, he wants to steal everything. He's an absolute charismatic monster. I loved it. And my daughter was again saying to me, Daddy, please stop going away everywhere. Please stay home with us. They offered me the series on the day I was there shooting it. They said, you've got to stay. We got to write this guy into all the show. But I didn't stay. The director said to me, do me one favor. I'm coming to LA next month. I'm leaving the show and I want to work in LA. I've got to have you in whatever I do. I love what you're doing. Next thing I know is he comes down to do Deep Space Nine. I get a call from my agent and I forget his name, sorry, but he's directing and he wants you. So I think, I'm in, I'm going to do a Deep Space Nine. So I go in to do this audition for Deep Space Nine, Honor Among Thieves, and it was a great role. It's really basically the Donnie Brasco story about the guy that infiltrates the underground and becomes best friends with the criminal boss. And then when the criminal boss realizes he's a stooge, he's got to kill him. But he doesn't want to kill him because he likes him. And that's the basic theme of Donnie Brasco. So same thing. I come in and I do this. However, the director comes out, she says, great, Nick, it's wonderful to have you. He said, I've got one problem. He said, the producer inside, he said he wants to give this role to his next door neighbor. And so I don't know what I'm going to do, because I want you for this part. His next door neighbor is big, heavy set guy like Brian Dennehy, I don't want that. I want somebody like the Al Pacino character, little tough guy. And I know you can do it. So I go in and I play it, and he's standing behind the producer. He's going, so I finish and I walk out the door. He's going, go, get out. You've done your best. So I go and I think, okay, I've got the director likes me. The producer's going, thank you very much. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I don't get the role, right? So, c'est la vie. Happened to me many times. Give a great performance, don't get the role. Why, I don't know. It's a very weird profession that I work in. So I'm playing golf a week later, my phone rings. Quick, get down to Paramount Studios. They need you. I said, what are you talking about? The guy dropped dead. It's a true story. He shot one day, and on the day home, he's driving out through the front gates. They open the gate, drives the car out, stops in the middle of the gates, and they go, come on. And he's going, he died in the wheel, sitting there. So then they didn't call me that day. They didn't call me the next day, because he then says to them, get me Nick Tate. And the producers go, no, my friend's dead. We're going to cast him. We're going to get a real actor. So they go out and they scour LA for 2 days. And then he says to them, I'm walking off this film if you don't give me Nick Tate. Brings me in and I do it. And it's, it's regarded as one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine they've got. Because he was right, and I was right for the role, and the producer's a prick. He never spoke to me the whole time I was there. I seem to have that effect on a lot of people. No. I'm sorry, I've taken way too long, haven't I?
You're all right.
Anybody else got
How are
another
we
question?
on time, Mr. Wonderfest guy?
It's actually gone 35 minutes over.
Yeah, but you didn't stop us.
Do we have a final question anyway? Yes?
Anything you can share about Derek Meddings?
Who?
Derek Meddings, the effects guy that worked on Space. I don't know if he did Space 99. He did UFO, but he did all the Gerry Anderson stuff.
Yeah, he didn't do
No,
99. That was all.
No,
Brian.
there's nothing I can tell you about it. Anybody else?
What's your favorite episode?
Oh, that's subjective, you know. One where I did lots. I wasn't often allowed to do lots. You know, in fact, I will tell you there was an episode where I was going to do lots. About 4 episodes into the first series, Johnny Byrne asked me to come down to his house, and he showed me a script. He said, "We're so excited that we've got you. I'm sorry that we didn't have the Italian actor, but we're thrilled with what you're doing. But none of us know how to write for an Australian. So we want to talk to you about all your background, what your ideas are and what we're thinking of. And we've written an episode which is going to be called Dragon's Domain, and we want you to do this, and we're very thrilled and excited that you're going to be doing it." And he let me see the draft, and I was like, "This is amazing." He said, "Yeah, and this is what we've got in store for you as Alan Carter." 3 weeks later, the final script is delivered on set. I open up the page. First page, Alan Carter gets banged on the head, goes to the infirmary and spends the entire episode there. I go into Sylvia's office and I knock on the door. She says, "Yeah, Nick." I said, "Can I see you?" She said, "Sure, darling." And so I go in, I put the script down, I said, "Sylvia, what happened?" And she said, "What do you mean, Nick?" Now, I'm going back in time, right? None of us know any of the other things I told you. She says, what are you talking about? I said, "Johnny Byrne showed me the draft of this script. They, being Chris Penfold and Johnny, they wrote this script for me. Why am I knocked on the head and in the infirmary?" She said, she went over and she locked the door to Gerry's office, locked the door to the corridor. She goes to the bar and she pours the scotch. She said, "You drink scotch?" I said, "No." She said, "You do now." "Drink that." And I go, "That's straight scotch." I said, "Can you put a splash of what?" She said, "Just drink it, Nick." She said, "You think everybody loves you, don't you?" And I go, "Yeah." She said, "They don't, Nick." I said, "What do you mean they don't? I'm having a ball." She said, "Yeah, you're having a ball." What, we're 7 weeks in, we've done, 4 episodes? "Nick, you're rising too fast." I said, "What do you mean I'm rising too?" She said, "Nick," I said, "You're the producer, aren't you, Sylvia?" She said, "You think I have any power?" She said, "Well, so what, Gerry doesn't like me?" She said, "No, come on, Nick. Be smart. Gerry's not the producer of this show." I said, "Reg Hill is the producer?" She said, "No, come on. How naive are you?" I swear to God, at that point in the show, I had no concept that there was somebody that didn't like me. It's not true that he didn't like me. He's like a dog with a bone. He loved me, but I took his bone, or I was threatening to take his bone, and he was not going to let me have that fucking bone. Too soon. Those were his exact words to me when I finally confronted him with it. She said, "I'm not going to say his name, but you know who it is, and you are in grave danger of being kicked out of the show if you keep being good." I finished, I said, "What, being good?" She said, Nick, it's very awkward for us. It's awkward for us all because he has so much control. He governs everything. And you mustn't run foul of him. I said, "I never have." She said, "No, but then don't take his bone." All right? She said he's a big dog with a bone. And I always remembered that, and it was very hard for me for the next year, but I remained his best friend because I really liked him. Very hard when you know you have a friend that can't handle your being his friend because he doesn't want you to take his bone. Martin never, ever helped me, ever. I came to America, he always said to me, come and see me, you'll be a star. All he could do was tell me that he had made $1 million. And he didn't want to help. I asked him, can you introduce me to your agent? No, she doesn't take, or whatever he said. Martin would ring me 2 o'clock in the morning some mornings when I started doing all those voiceovers. My phone would ring. Nicky, it's 4 in the morning, Martin. Yeah, I know. How are you? I'm great, Martin, and things are going well, finally. I'm so pleased to hear that, because I know I'm hearing you all the time. I said, yeah, you are. Is there something you want to tell me? No, just wanted to say hi. I said, well, hi, but I'm a bit tired now, Martin. Can we talk later? Yeah, sure. Click. He must have done that to me 7 times since Space 1999. With no information, nothing. Why was I hanging around in his mind? But never, I want you on the show. Never, I'm going to introduce you to this person. And in life, you have to get on with your own life and make things work. I realized that, and he was one of the chief motivators for me to have done all the things that I have done in my life. Because you've got to do it on your own. Even when you think you've got a good friend, because that good friend doesn't want you to have his bone. And shame, because I love the guy. He's one of the greatest talents I've ever worked with. He never did me physically on camera or anywhere else any harm ever, except that he would go in and tell them from time to time, that script's not. I know it went on continually. I don't like that scene. He would always get the drafts. He doesn't get that scene. I don't want him doing this, or I don't want her doing that. Martin was the boss. And his instincts generally for him was spot on. I mean, he was really, it's like knowing somebody's great at golf or whatever they're at. I can't deny what he did. He was a wonderful actor. And I loved working with him because, I was lucky to sit in that eagle with him every day, because it's like playing tennis, nobody knows how good you are until you play with somebody who's really good. And if you can play with them, then it's great. And I loved working with him for that reason. Thanks, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Tate.